Hello, welcome to Story Lounge, story time for adults. You're invited to sit back, grab your pet, grab someone else's pet with their consent, of course. You can grab a house plant because they're sentient beings and so are you. If you don't have a pet or a house plant, don't worry. We can still help you feel cozy. We will cover you in a blanket of words, or you could have a crochet blanket like one I prepared earlier. I'm really sorry, but our insurance doesn't allow us to come to your house and cover you with pets or with house plants, so you'll have to make those decisions for yourself. My name's Natalie. I'm a librarian at City of Melbourne Libraries, and joining me is my colleague Lisa.
Hi, Natalie.
Are you covered in pets or houseplants?
Just the fungus gnats today, just buzzing around, keeping me company. Yeah.
And you have a palm behind you, the genus of which I did not research before we went live. So do you know what kind of?
I think it's a Dracaena marginata, but I could have made that up.
It sounds like something you would put on toast.
Yeah.
Now, Lisa has been running this Story Lounge or a version of this Story Lounge program inside our libraries for many, many years. But today, Lisa and I and you are together alone in our homes. For this episode, Lisa is going to read extracts from two books that are on the current 2020 Miles Franklin long list.
We've been telling you for ages how brilliant Victorian writers are, and this year's long list has more than half of the list made up of Victorian writers. So today I will be reading from two of them, Act of Grace by Anna Krien and Islands by Peggy Frew.
Two favourites of my life of books. My life in books, two of my favourites. Quite a few Victorian writers have won the Miles Franklin in previous years, including Peter Temple, Stephen Carroll, Sophie Laguna. Did I get that right? Sophie Laguna. Yeah. And A.S. Patrick. So best of luck to all the Victorian writers that are shortlisted or long-listed this year. Well, they'll make it to the shortlist. I'm just going to confidently say that. All the Victorian long-listed and soon-to-be shortlisted Miles Franklin Prize potentials for this year. We hope you are comfortable and you're ready to enjoy these pieces of writing. Feel free to close your eyes and drift to wherever Lisa's voice takes you as she reads aloud to us. After and between the two readings, we'll have a bit of a chat about what we've heard. I'll keep my eye on the comments section in YouTube, so if you're watching live, feel free to share your ideas, your thoughts, whatever pops into your head while Lisa's reading or while we're chatting, and we'll include you in our conversation. Lisa, would you take it away?
I will. So Islands and Acts of Grace are actually two very different books. Islands is a book about families. It's told in little stories or fragments, but every fragment brings greater perspective, more depth and compassion for its characters. It reminds me a bit of a mosaic. So all these beautiful shimmering pieces form a textured, multi-dimensional whole. Act of Grace, on the other hand, is a globe-trotting grenade of a novel. If I were to continue the art analogy, it would remind me of something like Picasso's Guernica. It's a great canvas of action and consequence and a world where the line between perpetrator and victim is never simple. So first up, I'm going to read from Act of Grace by Anna Krien. The section that I'm going to read is set in Iraq during the rule of Saddam Hussein. It actually features Saddam Hussein as a character. He's referred to as Uncle in this section. And it also features Nassim, who is one of the book's main characters, when she's quite a young girl. It had been a wonderful time. He told Nassim to call him Uncle, and when she shyly asked after his horses, he immediately organised a convoy of cars to take her to the palace. At the stables, Uncle lifted Nassim onto Hussam, a mottled silver and white stallion, showing her where to hold the reins, putting her feet in the gilded stirrups. As he spoke to the stable hands, she put her arms around the horse's neck, her face in his mane, and closed her eyes, the earthy scent filling her. Quietly, so no one could hear, she told Hussam that she loved him, whispering into a velvet ear. The horse nickered, a wet warmth coming from his nostrils. Seeing this, Uncle laughed. He likes you. He ordered a stable boy to lead his Sam outside, slowly, reminding Nassim to hold the reins. She nodded and pressed her thighs against the horse, weighting the balls of her boots on the stirrups. Then with her ankles, she gave the stallion a flick. Without knowing, she'd instructed Hussam to gallop. He took off as the boy lurched to the side, and behind her she heard the startled shouts and forgot to pull back on the reins as Uncle had showed her. Instead, she sat low, the leather straps and the horse's mane threaded in her fingers, stirring as Hussam kicked up clods of grass and shot across the field. Suddenly, Saddam was beside her, on a beautiful black horse he hadn't saddled, just flung himself onto. He pulled his animal close to her, yelling, "Oif!" and grabbed her reins, bringing Hussam down to a trot with his. Nassim sat up and smiled. Saddam began to laugh. "You are happy?" he said. "You smile instead of feel fear?" He laughed and laughed. Later, when they rode back to the others, he told her parents, "I thought she'd be in tears, but your girl was smiling. She is a natural." And she was. Nassim took to writing much like she'd taken to the piano, but this time, in contrast to her father's high praise of her piano playing and her mother's insistence that she practice daily, her parents said nothing. When she tried to talk about the horses on the chauffeur-driven journey home, "Which car would you like?" asked Uncle. And when her parents deferred to him, he would say to her mother, "This one, it matches your lovely dress." They would not answer. "I love them all, but I love Hussam the best," Nassim would say breathlessly, and to her mother, "Which one do you like best?" Once her mother had snapped, "None of them, none," and her father put his hand on her knee, jerking his chin at the driver. Her mother frowned and stared out the window again. Confused, Nassim also fell silent.
I'm taking notes.
Well, Natalie, I know that you've also read Act of Grace.
I have.
So you know that Nassim is one of the main characters whose journey is followed throughout the novel.
Mm.
And I think what's so interesting about Nassim and about this novel is that Nassim ends up being a refugee in Australia. But Nassim is a flawed human being. Nassim is not perfect. Nassim makes mistakes, terrible mistakes, but he's still worthy of our compassion, our interest. What do you think about that?
I think the terrible mistake she makes, well, I scratch my chin in a very literati way.
You can lean back as well. That sometimes helps.
It's just itchy, though. I'm not sure why. That's a legit itch. It's not a literary itch. What I was going to say was she makes what end up being quite damaging choices for herself and the people around her in order to survive.
They are about survival, definitely.
They're all about survival. And I feel like that passage that you read, she's being thoroughly manipulated.
Mm-hmm.
But she doesn't see that because she's a young girl, and all she sees is the freedom from her parents' house, the freedom of riding a horse, the freedom of being outdoors and escaping what is otherwise a very oppressive lifestyle. Yeah. And she doesn't see that all of that freedom is a manipulation, but her parents see that very keenly because they're not excited for her, and they're not, they're very withdrawn because they're very fearful. They know what each step of, they know what's in front of Nassim, which is a fairly horrific set of circumstances, and they can see her being led in that direction and are completely helpless to stop that. But she doesn't yet see it. But I think as she ages and as she sees horrific things and as she participates in them herself, she changes. How would it not change you? And hardens in some ways, but also softens in others. She's got a giant heart, despite the decisions that she makes, and and the full awareness of how those decisions will impact negatively on other women, particularly, she's still, well, she's obviously got survival at the front of her mind. Even when she is in Australia, she makes some choices about how she gets here and what she does when she's here. But she really does have that sort of very gentle heart. It's a conflict sometimes with characters because you want to love them or you want to hate them, right? You kind of want to pick a side or you want to identify with them. But I think Nassim kind of runs the gamut of all of those things.
I think you've put your finger on something which is great about this book in general, is that none of the characters are black or white. They're all very nuanced. They have, Anna insists on giving them their full humanity. Whether they're a minor character or a major character, whether they're someone we ultimately sympathise with or don't, we're given the full context of their lives in order to make those decisions. In fact, it's actually, I started off by saying that these two books were quite different, but this is actually something that Peggy Frew does beautifully as well. She really insists on drawing fully human characters, even quite minor characters. They're not set up to be laughed at or hated or dismissed. You might just get a glimpse of them, but they are fully human. And both of those writers have a remarkable ability to do that with their characters.
Yeah, they're people who write people.
Absolutely.
I've picked up another thread between the two, but I wonder if I should save it for after you read Peggy. Or after you read, from Peggy. Just like, Peggy's my mate, okay? Like, we're besties and it's all okay. But I should just refer to her as Peggy Frew, the author of the book Islands. And maybe I think we're mates, but I'm just saying I should be more respectful. Thank you, Peggy, for your kindness.
Would you like me to read it and then we'll talk about the threads?
I might hang on to my wild idea.
Okay, don't forget.
Well, I wrote it down because I have
perfect.
Pencil. You know what I noticed though? This pencil has some teeth marks in it, and they're not human teeth marks because I've chewed pencils many times in my life. So I'm gonna say that somebody else was pensively chewing this pencil. I think it was an animal.
Well, cats sometimes need to take notes too, Natalie.
Maybe I'm gonna guess it was Peanut just by the sharpness of the puncture wounds on the pencil. As you were, please read aloud to me.
All right, so this will be an extract from Islands by Peggy Frew. The extract features two of the main characters in the novel, June and her mother Helen. And June is now a mother herself in this part of the book. And her own mother lives in Noosa, which is several states away from where June lives. They've not been close since the breakup of the family when June was about 12 years old. Some time ago, she'd had coffee with an acquaintance, another painter. Lisa, the woman is called. For some reason, they were on the topic of mothers, perhaps. June showed Lisa Helen's website. Wow, Lisa said, she looks about 40. Then June showed Lisa Dev's website, the homepage of which has a photo of Dev, shaven-headed, shirtless and slick-skinned against darkness, grinning in the glow of an outdoor fire. Spiritual manhood, Lisa read aloud. Claim your natural masculinity. She glanced up at June. No way. What do they do? They go into the bush, said June, which I think is a semi-cleared block of land not very far from Noosa. And they build a sweat lodge and get naked and sit in it and sweat and tell stories and cry. And then when they're finished, Dev has to go back and dismantle the sweat lodge and scatter the material around so the next group can discover them and use them to build their own sweat lodge. Lisa's laugh was so loud that the people at the next table turned to look. June actually doesn't know if it's true about Dev dismantling the sweat lodge each time, but she assumes it must be. How else would it work? She felt guilty, though, after the conversation with Lisa, for making fun of him. She's only met Dev a couple of times. She knows nothing about him, really. He seems like a nice enough guy and sincere, despite the ridiculousness of his occupation. There is a shadow behind this guilt, another layer. Might Helen, with her suggestion of a little ceremony, not also be entitled to earnestness, to genuine motives? June ignores this. The last time she saw Helen and Dev was after the birth of Maggie. They appeared at the hospital, a surprise visit, but only stayed for an hour or so before they had to go somewhere else. The surprise visit, it seemed, happened to coincide with the life coaching conference. June, exhausted and hormonal, burst into happy tears at the sight of her mother, something that had never happened before. But then when the conference was mentioned, became sullen. Paul and Esther were due to arrive later in the day, but Helen was apparently not able to wait long enough to see them. "What a shame," said Helen. "You'll all have to come up and see us sometime instead." At this, June's sullenness hardened into anger. Yeah, she thought, I'll drag myself out of my hospital bed, shall I? And Paul has to get back to work soon, but how about I just tuck my newborn and my toddler under one arm each and jog up the coast to see you, Mum? Easy as that. June's stitches had begun hurting, but not too badly. She could have waited until Helen and Dev had gone. Instead, she made a point of ringing for the nurse and asking for painkillers, sitting up with a wince to swallow them, and ignoring Maggie, who had begun to cry in her plastic crib. She pretended to be busy refilling her water glass as the crying intensified, and then was ravaged by crisscrossing blasts of righteousness, guilt, satisfaction, and self-loathing as Helen picked up the baby and tried to soothe her. Shh now, said Helen, holding the bawling Maggie as if she was a tray of drinks. June was about to intervene with a long-suffering sigh when Dev stepped forward, taking the baby into his large hands, where she immediately fell silent. "Hello," said Dev to Maggie in a hushed voice. A smile softened his big, sharp-boned face. "Look at you," he whispered. "Look how new you are." The room stayed very quiet. June experienced a joint-loosening surge of love for her tiny daughter, who was gazing silently up at Dev. Then, shame, thick and unbearable. How could she contaminate this newborn with her resentment, allow such ill feeling into the same air that was entering her child's pure and eager lungs?
I'm just making just a tiny note that says multi-generational trauma. We can come back to that. Tiny things, just a tiny thing.
Yeah.
But that's in both books as well.
It is absolutely in both books.
Yeah. Is Dev Helen's new partner?
Yes, he is. And what I love about Dev, we don't get very much of Dev in the novel, but he starts out as possibly a character that you could laugh at with his sweat lodges. He could be perfect for just a little, set up and ridicule character. But even Dev gets his own humanity in that moment with the baby in the hospital. It's just so beautiful what she does. No one is just an easy target. Everyone is given that sort of full range of human emotion, history, complexity, whether they are a minor or a major character.
And is the context of this when June goes to see Helen because Helen's unwell?
Yes. So she's actually, there's a lot of time shifts in this book.
Yes.
So chronologically, she's actually on a plane thinking back
about the birth of Maggie.
And meeting Dev and seeing Helen. I think maybe it was the last time she saw Helen and Dev was the birth of Maggie, and now she's on the plane going to see Helen in Noosa and reflecting on that time.
Yeah, there's some parts of books, like the settings that I've visualized while I've been reading them, and they've become memories for me.
Yeah.
So Anna Spargo Ryan in The Paper House has a back garden that one of her characters spends time in. And that feels like a place I've visited. Like it's just stuck in my head. Beautiful place. I like escaping there as if I've been there, but technically kind of have in my imagination. Anyway, with this particular extract that you're reading me, I can visualize June sitting on the couch with her mum and Dev in the back in the apartment, and someone cooks lunch and she's got a very sterile bedroom, like in the spare room where she's staying, and Like I can I feel like I was there with them as they were having this reunion.
Yeah, well, I think place is incredibly important in islands,
Mm.
and it's beautifully evoked. There are lots of beaches and beach scenes.
Yeah.
There are city scenes. But yeah, whether you're at the beach or the city, the sense of place is beautifully drawn, very clear. You can totally picture all the places where the events take place.
Yeah. Well, okay. So here's the thread that I wanted to weave for us. The word that I wrote down for both of them was puzzle. So it's visualized on the cover of Islands. You've got an image that's been torn into pieces, which is a bit of a puzzle.
Yeah.
But also the book comes together like a bit of a puzzle because you've got different characters in every chapter. You've got time shifts, you've got place shifts. And it's really by reading it that you build, the narrative comes together. You build it in your own head as you progress through the book. The characters come together. You have a sense of what they were like as young people and as older people, the decisions that they make, and then you see the impacts of those decisions. And it's kind of a really beautiful structure that's done incredibly well.
Yeah.
Like incredibly well. In the hands of Peggy Frew, it's beautiful. In the hands of Anna Krien, just as beautiful. Her book is a puzzle because you start with, is it 5 characters? 5 very distinct, it's 4 or 5.
Yeah.
Very distinct characters, different parts of the world, different times.
How's it all going to connect? We don't know.
And yet it does. And in some ways it doesn't. Like not everyone ends up at the same dinner party. Like that's not the vibe of Act of Grace. But they're certainly all on a trajectory towards each other. And as a reader, I always trust in the writer to take me there.
Yeah.
So if I start it and I don't know who these characters are and there's too many names and I'm shifting times and I don't know who was married to who and I just have to suspend the fact that I need a family tree. Please give me some structure. I just need to suspend that and go with it. Like I have to trust in the writer that they're going to take me there. And in something like Lincoln in the Bardo by George Saunders, which has, I don't know, 200 characters, and it's written like a play, and some characters never reappear. And the first 50 pages of that book are a challenge. And you're thinking, I read to escape. I read to enjoy. I read to learn. I don't read to have to take notes. Like that's a different kind of reading. I'm talking about reading for pleasure. So you just have to trust, okay, George Saunders, he either knows what he's doing or I get to 50 pages and I put it down and read something else because this book is not for me. So I trust a great deal when I'm reading. And these books didn't let me down. As fragmented as they were for the first few chapters and as much as it took a bit of an effort to get there, I have zero regrets because these authors, both of them, took me to places that were, you know, traumatic and unforgettable in lots of ways. And lots of things remain unresolved, which is my least favorite thing ever. But you know, sometimes when you put your faith in writers and they deliver for you, it's like you feel like they're your best friends. That's how I feel anyway.
Did you want to say anything about the intergenerational trauma aspect of these books?
Oh, what to say about that, really, truly. But you were saying earlier about how Anna Krien draws characters, and Peggy too, but I'm talking about Act of Grace specifically, characters that you know don't want at your dinner parties.
Yeah.
There's one particular male character who fought in Iraq. I can't remember his name.
Tui.
Yeah, I didn't like him, so I forgot his name on purpose.
Yeah.
Thank you for reminding me. He has a physical. He has shrapnel in his body from his time fighting in as a soldier, and that manifests physically when he's back in Australia because it's exiting his body one small piece. The descriptions of that are so gross. I can't even tell you how gross they are. Super gross me out. Like I don't watch videos of people popping pimples for good reason. Like that's okay. It's gross. So, but what I felt a physical revulsion towards him as a character, but also towards this physical thing that he was experiencing. I felt so angry at him about the way he treated his son and
Yes.
his partner, so angry towards him. And yet Anna gave me every reason imaginable for why his behavior had changed from when he was a young person to the experiences of war. I can't imagine, but I read about it, and that empathy kicked in, and I didn't want it to. I wanted to continue.
Mm-hmm.
This person is gross, and gross things are happening to their body, and
sometimes it's easier just to hate the bad character. And what these writers do, they challenge you to feel something for even the sort of least honourable characters in the novels. They both do it. I felt little sympathy for Helen at the start of Islands, and then we learn more and more about Helen's background and history, and I felt so much compassion. Another thing that you've reminded me of with the shrapnel and the grossness of the body, both writers are really unafraid to give their characters actual human bodies with bodily functions and things that malfunction, and the kind of grossness of being in our human sort of shells. Neither of them shy away from that. They're quite sort of earthy in that way, and that they will sort of get down and dirty with the human body, which is just another little thread between the two. Yeah.
Maybe we should have Anna Krien and Peggy Frew over for a dinner party.
That would be so lovely.
Yeah, I would love to ask them questions. Speaking of questions, we have some that have popped up in the chat.
Do we? Let's get to them.
So there's, I'll take it as a question, even though it's a comment. We'll do the reverse of most literary events. It seems like there are a lot of unsaid feelings in both books, and the characters are grappling with these. If that's a question, the answer is yes. There are many unsaid feelings, but as readers, we get the internal monologue, we get the thought process for each of those characters. And it's that beautiful, to me, it's that beautiful line between what we think, what we want to say, how we think the conversations will go, and then the way we behave and the things that we actually say.
It's true. We learn so much about these characters, but there is plenty of room for us to imagine, interpret. We're not just handed things on a platter. There's definitely a lot going on beneath the surface that we're sort of left to figure out and bring our own experiences to.
There's another question for us. Are the bullet holes real? So this is the cover of Anna Krien's book. So we looked at the cover of Islands and saw that it was a puzzle. And so now looking at this.
No, my finger doesn't go through.
Oh, I don't think the question was, did somebody shoot the book?
Oh, okay.
I think the question was more, are they just in the artwork, and do they relate to the story? Unless they imagined you shot your own book, but we don't violent. Lisa and I don't violent, just to be clear.
We don't. It's not a real library thing.
No.
Guns.
No, not at all.
No. So yes, this very much relates to the story, because it's really a book about war and the consequences of war, and the way war doesn't just affect the people directly involved, but ripples out through families, communities, neighbourhoods, countries, nations. And so the bullet holes are quite significant symbolically, I think, for this book.
I also think that particular scene with where Tui gets his shrapnel from, I think the cover is from that scene. I imagine that to be the moment of gunfire and explosion where the shrapnel enters his, I think it enters his whole body, but it certainly starts
the neck,
oozing out of his neck, and he's grabbing it with tweezers. It's pretty gross.
Yeah.
Thanks, Anna. So you can still come to the dinner party. What will we cook them?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. Well, I think it would have to be something very layered, maybe a lasagna.
Okay, we could do that. All right. So Lisa and I have to go now and cook a lasagna, and also invite our new friends Anna and Peggy to hang out with us. Lisa, would you like to read some script for us?
Oh, sure. So don't forget, City of Melbourne Libraries has an incredible collection of ebooks and e-audio books, with both of these remarkable novels available.
Yes, I think there's e-audio of Peggy Frew for sure. And a lot of the long listed Miles Franklin books are available in our e-collections as well. If you're a member of the library, you can jump onto the website, head to the ebooks and collections page, and through there you can access our online catalogue, find the books you want to listen to or read on your e-reader, and away you go. And if you're not a member yet, you can join up. It's a very simple online form. You'll get your membership details on the same day. And again, log straight in, download, start reading. Thank you so much for joining us today on Story Lounge. See ya.